Jets up to the 30, the 20, 10, 5. Torrey Horton back to the end zone.
48-yard play. Guess who? Body up the middle, making another move to the outside. 15, 10, end zone again.
Keeps it. Nice move by Brown. He's got space. He's got 6. 35-yard touchdown for Byron Brown. A record-setting night for the South Florida quarterback.
Third down so far. A little bit of a high snap. Genty right up the middle. Genty has room. Ashton Genty. Give him 6.
Second and long. Lagar tries to pin it in. Rose. It does. Rose stays up. The Suns offense 4-3 wheels. Incredible effort for Rose.
The G5 Hive. All G5, all the time.
Welcome to the G5 Hive Live. We are excited to bring you the G5 college football coverage you love each and every week. I am Luke, and I am joined by my co-host, Justice. If you are watching us on X, please hit that like. Sorry. If you're watching us on X, please give us a follow, like, retweet. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. So, Justice, let's move in to the week 2 waiver wire honey. Take us away with our quarterbacks.
All right. So quarterbacks this week, leading us off is Caden Samanza. They only played one game. As we said, he's a 2020 guy. Not going to belabor the point. We had an outstanding week 1 for him, or game 1, I should say. And Caden Samanza is only 3% owned. Next up, Devin Dampier, only 13% owned. They had a bye week, so I wouldn't expect his number to jump drastically because they didn't play last week. They do get P4 Auburn this week, so you might temper your expectations for Devin Dampier, but hopefully he can get things going against the Tigers there from the SEC. JC French, this one surprises me. He's still only 1% owned. He's the number one guy in our 2020 list. Like only 1% owned. That just seems criminal. Next up, Matt Sluka, only 11% owned. Like that seems really low to me. I the only thing I can come up with of why it is so low is because it was such a contested battle, right? Between him and Hodge Malik Williams. You didn't really know, like, up until almost game time, I guess, right? That Sluka was going to be the starter. That's the only reason I guess I can come up with why Sluka is only at 11%.
I've got one. I've got a theory. Somebody's not active in the league, and he's still a placeholder.
He's still Lucas Linoff.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's why he's only 11% on. That's my.
Yeah, we should look that up and see what Lucas Lindhoff's owner percentage is. Someone never replaced the placeholder. That's a great point. And then rounding out this group of quarterbacks here is Kirk Francis, Tulsa. 0% owned. Another great option there from the G5. Sticking with the quarterbacks. Ethan Vasco didn't have a great game this week, but they're playing William & Mary, right? They're not gonna. The game is pretty easily in hand. They're not going to show too much and risk injury against an FCS opponent. But Ethan Vasco, Coastal Carolina, he is the centerpiece of that offense. He is only 15% owned, and the same can be said for Tucker Gleason, right? Like folks were crazy about DeQuan Finn. But they're not as crazy about Tucker Gleason. And I don't know. I feel like, Tucker Gleason's going to put up similar numbers in that Rocket offense to DeQuan Finn. And folks are still sleeping on him. Only 14% owned. Skylar Locklear at UTEP, 0% owned. They had a rough week in terms of they played FCS opponent, didn't get the win. But Skylar Locklear is putting up the numbers. And so from a fantasy perspective, you don't really care if that team wins or loses so much. You want to see those statistics and those passing numbers, and he's been doing that through 2 weeks. Darian Mensah at Tulane, man, like this kid's impressive, like super impressive, and he is 0% owned. That's another one that surprises me. He's gonna light it up once they get into AAC play. And then Emmett Brown, San Jose State. That's another one I kind of attribute. He's only 0% owned. And so that's another one I kind of attribute to that. There's a quarterback battle. At one point, it was a 3-way battle, and then it kind of got narrowed down to 2 again right before the season started there. But they're the Craig Stutzman spread and shred offense. They're going to throw the ball around. And one thing, like I think folks need to be thinking ahead, and that's for all the guys we're going to be talking about in on the waiver wire honey this week, and for that matter, last week and next week too, is when conference play comes, these guys are going to shine, right? You don't have those G5 or as many G5 versus P4 matchups, and so if you're kind of looking ahead, are you picking up Devin Dampier to go against Auburn this week? Absolutely not. But you're picking Devin Dampier up when he has that Mountain West schedule, right? Which is coming up, in just another week. And so you want to be out in front of these kinds of things and adding these guys now, so you're not left behind, the 8 ball, so to speak, once they're tearing it up in conference play. So Luke, I'm going to hand it over to you for the running backs.
Well, first off, Lucas Lenhoff 0% owned, so my theory squashed. Not something.
Well, and we know like 0%
happened.
doesn't really mean 0%. It just
Right.
It's
really
just a really, really low number.
Absolutely. Running back. So I did a little bit different than you, Justice. I noticed you had a couple guys on there that were on the 2020 list. I have decided, I guess, full transparency for you guys. Justice and I are going to kind of be going back and forth in making these, but I'm always, I think, going to be making the running backs and tight ends. We'll be talking about different ones each week. But if you're on the 2020 list, I'm not putting you as a waiver wire guy to pick up. If they're on the 2020 list, you need to be listening to the whole episode. If they're on the 2020 list, go pick them up. If they're available in your league, they're getting the opportunities, they're getting the yards. They should be a guy that is no longer on your waiver wire if you need to pick them up. So, I don't have those. I'm looking for deeper guys here. Again, under 30% owned for all of these, but like who's other people so we can uncover other gems here. And I'm going to start off with Javon Jackson, UTEP, 24% owned, workhorse, 20 carries there this last week. I mean, he's it. He's what they're using in the backfield. Go get him. Christian Washington, Coastal Carolina, 1% owned. Bennett banged up last week. They used a rotation. Their number 4 running back, I believe it was, got hurt last week. So they're down to 3 running backs.
I think Max Baltazar is out for the year.
So he's currently averaging through 2 games, 14.5 touches for 73.5 yards. I think that's for 1% owned. I might be interested. They're not going to throw the ball super well. I really don't know who they're throwing the ball to there at Coastal. So Christian Washington, a name to know. Rahaj Harris, ECU, 6%. He saw 26 carries in week 2. He didn't see much in week 1. What's the deal with that? Well, looking through some stuff, asking some questions. It was a blowout there in week 1. They didn't really need to have him out there. He's going to be the lead back. He's going to split time. It's going to be like a 1-2 punch. Now, I'm not even going to say 1A, 1B punch with gun. Like, it'll probably be like a 2 to 3, like a 66 to 33 kind of percent.
I think Bond will get some carries too, just because he's a different kind of back.
Yeah, but I like Harris there. 26 carries in week 2, like that. Kanye Udo, Army, 4%, consistent. 14 carries in week 1, then 15 carries, 75 yards, then 70 yards. He has 3 touchdowns on the year. They're going to run the ball, and he does it well. A freshman last year. You like to see what Kanye Udo can do here in 2024. And then I left your guy here, Justice, wide receiver, running back, Trayon Sibley, Liberty, 27% owned, over 100 yards receiving in back-to-back weeks. If you're in one PPR leagues, great guy to have in a running back position, however you want to
Yeah,
play him.
yeah. I mean, he is a receiver, but he has dual eligibility, and if you're in a PPR league, those guys, can be fill-ins, and they might not, he might not have the high ceiling, but he's got a high floor.
Absolutely. Then next slide, we've got Seth McGowan. He was on here last week, 5% owned, 20.7 points, 17.6 points in back-to-back weeks. A bright spot for New Mexico State. I believe, right? He came from transfer from Oklahoma, I believe. Is
Well,
that
he
the
went from Oklahoma to junior college and then to New Mexico State. But yes, originally he was a Oklahoma commit.
UMass? Not a lot going on for them in this offense, but Jalen John, 2% owned, 14 carries in back-to-back weeks, was shut down by Toledo, but he's got Buffalo this next week. So a guy that might pop off here, Jalen John, also on there last week. Another hybrid wide receiver, running back type being used more as a wide receiver, Cam Thomas, UTEP. He is an Austin P transfer. Tiny guy, 5'7", something like that, real small. 0% owned, averaging 8.5 targets and 85 yards per game. You like to see that. And then Ahmad Hardy, University of Louisiana Monroe. We expect a step back based off the news, that Hunter Smith is going to get, worked into there a little bit more. But like I said, you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. Hunter Smith should be back, but touched in week 3, but touchdowns in back-to-back weeks for Ahmad Hardy and averaging 16.5 touches and 80.5 yards per game. I expect him to still see some carries. I mean, again, maybe these are all guys that are just watch and see. I really like Cam Thomas if you want to play him. I really like Seth McGowan, Trayon Sibley,
Yeah. I think that
Javon
in
Jackson.
my leagues, if those guys were all on my ad lists this week,
So,
if they weren't already rostered.
All right, Justice, take it away for wide receivers.
Number one to me, and it's absolute travesty. He's still on this list, and that's Nick Nash, right?
Jeez.
We've talked about it. I've heard others talk about it. Nick Nash, in a Craig Stutzman spread and shred offense, he's playing out of the slot. He is the guy that they're going to target, constantly every single week. Nick Nash is a wide receiver 1 for fantasy purposes, and I hope next week he is not on this list anymore. He needs to be above 30%. And we got Damon Ward. Damon Ward's of everyone we're going to talk about for wide receivers, Damon Ward's the one that's closest to that 30% threshold. Given the poor week 2 performance, I'm not sure he will break that threshold. He's at 28%. But North Texas is going to throw the ball, right? And I don't expect him to do what he did in week 1 every week, but I also don't expect him to do what he did in week 2 every week, right? It's probably somewhere kind of in the middle. But they do have a plethora of receiving options there for North Texas. Matter of fact, I'll go ahead and talk about another one here. DT Sheffield. DT Sheffield's kind of been, I guess, through 2 weeks, been the most consistent guy, right? Damon Ward went absolutely bonkers in week 1, did next to nothing in week 2. DT Sheffield, from a catches and target standpoint, was pretty consistent week 1 and week 2. But where he really jumped up in week 2 was he had 3 touchdowns. So DT Sheffield, probably got overlooked there in week 1, and people are taking notice of him here now in week 2. Magdalena, another guy that was on our 2020 list, kind of there with Jalen Moss, had a breakout performance in week 2. They had a pretty good performance in week 1 too, and Magdalena is 0% owned. I'm sure he's going to be a popular ad, this week. And then rounding out this group of receivers is Corey Rucker, Arkansas State. Luke talked about him in the 2020 list, heavily targeted, only 20%. I feel like all five of these guys here, if they are available, like you need to go out and get them. I'm not sure if you're not adding these guys, you must have a pretty stacked wide receiver room, because these guys are getting targets there and they're producing on a weekly basis, and they're all in good offenses too. All right, our next group of receivers here. Now these are these guys I would say are probably a tier below that group, that first group that I just talked about. But you got Dalen Cobb there at Georgia Southern. Again, consistent guy. I don't know that he has a super high ceiling, but I think he does have a high floor there for Georgia Southern. He is only 15% owned.
I got a question then for Justice. If Cobb is the second tier below that first tier, what separates him from DT Sheffield? Both
Probably
maybe option two.
Off the top of my head would be the touchdowns.
Okay, because if you're thinking they're both maybe wide receiver twos on their team, but then you got French with throwing the crap out of the ball most in the. I mean, Chandler Morris also on there. So I was just kind of curious what puts Cobb down there like a step, in terms of that, kind of what your thought process was.
Yeah, just I think for me, like touchdowns would probably be the big thing, and I don't know that he has like 200-yard upside, right? I think like but I think his floor is probably like 70 yards, right? But yeah, I mean he's consistent, and we want consistency too, and so you need those guys that have high floors as well. And ultimately, what you want is the guy has a high floor and a high ceiling, right? But that's like that's the golden goose, if you will, the golden egg, golden ticket. And so sometimes you need to kind of have a mix of guys that have high floors as well. Next up, Christian Fitzpatrick. We talked about him in the 2020 list. 0% owned. Again, you look at his just stats, like they don't look impressive. But man, he is getting a high number of targets each and every week, and that's the thing that stands out the most for me with Fitzpatrick. And I think this picture might be from the catch that Luke was talking about. Cade McDonald. We want to see it again here in week 3, what he can do there with Brett Gabbert, but he certainly looked good in that week 1 matchup. And someone that's he is 0% owned. And so one thing about Brett Gabbert, I think, what history has shown us is he locks in on a target, and early indications are that's going to be Cade McDonald. And, he could be the next Mac Hippenhammer, if you will. The guy that's going to be super productive at wide receiver there for Miami. Next up, a guy that I think is surprising folks, and that's Luke Floria from Kent State, 0% owned. We talked about him last week. Him and Krishan McCray. Kent State is going to be in a lot of negative game scripts where they're going to be passing the ball a lot because they're behind, and so this offense is turning into look like it's being able to support 2 receivers there with Luke Floria and Krishan McCray. And then finally, someone again that Luke talked about in the 2020 guys, Luke Wysong, New Mexico, 0% owned. He's the guy that's going to be heavily targeted in that New Mexico offense. I expect him to get a good amount of targets this coming week as well, playing against Auburn. He plays the slot. He's going to get some of those dump off passes from Dampier as he's facing the pressure of the Tigers there in week 3. But I mean, all of these guys from a receiver standpoint, I mean, I think are worthy to be added. Again, like I said in the quarterbacks, sometimes you guys need to be thinking about the weeks ahead, right? Because these guys, they're produced. Not only are they producing now, but just wait till they get to conference play, right? Where they're not playing, the SECs or the Big Ten teams. And so kind of get ahead of it, of your league mates there, and add some of these G5 players before we get to conference play where they're really going to shine. All right, Luke, why don't you finish us up there with the tight ends?
And I talked about earlier with the tight ends about this like threshold of right around like 4 targets. And Justice, if you want to do just a little bit of talking, I'm going to get into the spreadsheet on the back end, and I kind of want to look here on targets. So there's like this threshold. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys with 4.5 targets, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys who are averaging 4 targets, and then there's like everybody else. So like 4 is kind of like, okay, I might be able, give me into a touchdown, give me something here. So I took Bowden Groen. So here I'm all these guys are averaging 4 or more targets through 2 weeks. I took Bowden Groen out of that initial slide that he was in last week in that 2020, or not the 2020, yeah, in the 2020 group. But here he's only 13% owned for Rice, 5th in the G5 in targets, only averaging 30.5. So you need that touchdown. But yeah, I like Bowden Groen. I like what Rice can do. So again, averaging more than 4 targets. Actually 5th in G5 targets with let me see, great radio.
The one thing that stands out to me this group of 5 is I think there's 3 guys that are pretty consistent, and then there's 2 guys that like they've been all or nothing. Like Grayson Barnes had a great week 1, didn't do so much this week, and then Jackson Kanan from San Jose State didn't really do much week 1, had a great week 2, and
So Bowden Groen is at 6. He has 6 targets through 2 games, which you like to see. That's above that 4. Then Grayson Barnes, Northern Illinois, 31% owned. Again, he's over that threshold, but it's our show. I can make whatever rules I want. Yeah, it's 30% owned. I don't care. He's at 31. He's got dual eligibility most of the time in your leagues, wide receiver, tight end eligibility. He's got an 11-yard ADOT, so you like that. Eli Wilson, App State, 7%, nothing flashy. He's going to get you 3 receptions. Consistent. He's going to get you 3 receptions for 30 to 40 yards a game.
And maybe a touchdown every
Maybe a touchdown. Yep. So that's what you're going to get with Eli Wilson. Alex Bowman, Tulane, 8%. Similar to Groden, leads the G5 in touchdowns from the tight end position with 3. So he's getting those looks around the end zone. So if you want to chase a touchdown, Alex Bowman is a great guy to target. And then Jackson Kanan from San Jose State, 0% owned, but he has a 15.2 yard ADOT and is currently getting 4.5 targets per game, but only averaging 1.5 receptions. This is the same as the Fitzpatrick with a Marshall type thought process. He's averaging 44 yards through 2 games. He's hit or miss, but he's getting those deep targets in that offense that were, the spread and shred. If he can up those receptions in that 4.5 targets to 3, 2.5, you might be getting closer to 60 yards. So that's, again, it's a dart throw, but that's a guy that jumped out to me and widely available in your leagues. Anything that you want to talk about there, Justice? Otherwise,
yeah, I mean, no, I mean, my thoughts, like I said, Groen, Eli Wilson, and Bowman, I think they're more consistent. Barnes and Kanan seem to kind of be the boom or bust, right? At least through 2 weeks. We'll kind of maybe we'll see what week 3 has to hold for those guys. But Bowden Groen, like if he's available, like I'm adding him, right? If I don't like he should not be below that 30% threshold. I'd rather have Groen than Grayson Barnes personally, and Groen's only 13%. So, Bowden Groen, a productive tight end, consistent, one of the best tight ends in the group of 5, and definitely should be above that 30% threshold.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us tonight. Come back and join us next week as we discuss what happened in week 3, as well as look forward to week 4 of the 2024 season. And as always, bring you up to date on all the latest news and happenings in the world of G5 college football. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're watching us on X, please give us a retweet, a like, a follow. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please subscribe and leave those 5-star ratings and reviews. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.
First